A Passover dinner, because remember, Jesus was Jewish, and he was celebrating Passover, which is now in the Christian tradition known as the Last Supper. Literally, it was his Last Supper. But the Last Supper, Jesus went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, taking with him 3 disciples so that he could stay awake. And this just wasn't any prayer that Jesus went to pray. He went to the garden to pray because he was afraid. In his humanness, he was very, very afraid. And so he prayed not once, not twice, but 3 times the same prayer. Father, if it be possible, let this cup passeth from me. Father, if it be possible, let this cup passeth from me. And the third one, Father, if it is possible, let this cup passeth from me. And the remainder of that prayer, each time he spoke, it was, but if this cup cannot pass, and if I must drink it, let it be not as I will, but as thou wilt. Let it be not as I will, but as thou wilt. These are the ultimate words of surrender. Ultimate. The idea of surrendering to God's will has gotten a bad rap for several reasons. First, many traditional, conventional religions have used it in a way to explain those experiences that we might not have wanted to happen in our life as a way of God's will. You know, if you lose your job, well, it's God's will. And maybe you get an illness. It's God's will. You know, we sometimes fall into that kind of thinking. That's not it at all. And there's another much deeper reason that we may be reluctant to release, to let go, to surrender to the will of God. We're simply afraid of what might happen if we did. We might think that it might mean that we might not get what we want, or we'll have to sacrifice if we let our thinking, our will, be the only will, and let go to a higher purpose, that we can't make it happen. Or that God would dream up maybe some things that we might not want in our lives. My goodness, Jesus surrendered. Jesus surrendered to the higher will, and look what happened. He died. So Carolyn Mason, her book, Enter the Castle, spends a good deal of time writing about this. And she says, even as we crave spiritual intimacy with the divine, we also have deep fears about God and the ways that an encounter with the divine will change our lives. We long for guidance, but are terrified of revelation. We pray to know God, but fear God's answers. Muhammad, for instance, ran into a cave to hide from the angel Allah sent to enlist him in the services of the divine. Jesus had to face his fears about his calling. Many people end up frozen between worlds, she writes, filled with the desire to pursue their spiritual potential, filled with that desire, but fearing that following it will dismantle their everyday lives. So we are afraid of surrendering to God's will and what it might mean to us. Will it mean that we will have to give up things? Maybe change our lives? I think maybe change our lifestyle sometimes to a better one if we trust. But how will we have to change? There may be additional reasons for our hesitancy to surrender to God's will, but I think that those 2 are the biggest. And for those reasons, we won't release, we won't let go, and we think that we can't surrender to the will of the divine, or a power for good greater than we are, as Ernest Holmes would have put it. Our human minds are afraid of what we perceive to be the unknown. So we stay stuck many times in our problems, even if they're painful, even if they're very uncomfortable, because they are familiar. So when something is familiar, our human minds will stay with that lots of times instead of letting it go to a higher good. So if we really want to raise our consciousness, change our way of thinking that is not serving us anymore, we have to make that choice of setting the intention of releasing, surrendering to a power for good that is so much greater than anything we could ever comprehend. We have to have the faith and the trust to do this. As Stephen didn't have something there, we just sat and I just said, Stephen, we're all about surrender today, so we're not even gonna deal with it. And there, you know, boom, boom, and he got the little part, and it all worked out perfectly. And it really reminded me, just that little example reminded me of the greater good that is available to all of us when we surrender. We surrendered any kind of discomfort or fear that this isn't going to work out right, or the way I want it to work out. How many times do we really feel that we know the answer, and this is the way we're going to do it? We're going to do it this way, and there is no other way. This is the way. And a lot of the times, in fact, most of the times, it doesn't serve our highest good. When we say this or something better, as we do in affirmative prayer, or when we just release and let God take care of of what looks like the problems, as we did with Stephen. And God said, okay, well, I've got a couple of options for you. Are you open for them? How many times has God said to us, I have a couple of options open for you? And we're so closed, stuck in our way of thinking, that we don't let them through. So we just stay in this mode that doesn't serve our highest good. That's just one little example. It happens in everyday life. We have the choice to let go. For letting go of all resistance. That resistance blocks the flow of life from moving through us. And that flow of life that moves through us is when we feel the peace, when we feel the connection, when we feel the fulfillment and the joy and a life well lived. Those are the things that happen when we say, I of myself can do nothing. So Father within us doeth the work. And so we just let the divine within guide us and listen to the guidance.